Lebanon is often the target of attacks, but rarely the focus of attention. An entire country treated like collateral damage. More than 1/5 of the total population is now displaced. Any minute, an Israeli missile or drone can strike the country. On Thursday, it happened during a live report by Steve Sweeney, a British correspondent for Russian state broadcaster RT.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and a minute.
Sweeney said it was a deliberate attack. He and his camera operator, Ali Rida Spite, survived, though both were treated for shrapnel wounds. Such strikes are not rare. The attack on the RT crew came a day after this Israeli strike on the home of Hezbollah-affiliated Al-Manar TV journalist Mohammed Shari in central Beirut, killing him, his wife, and injuring his son. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Shari is one of 7 journalists and media workers killed in Lebanon by Israeli strikes since 2023. And keep in mind, the other 6 were killed amid the Israeli-Gaza war, when between 2023 and 2025, Israeli attacks killed 255 journalists across the region. That has made journalism in Lebanon dangerous and all the more vital to report what's happening on the ground. Here's France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent reporting from Beirut last week.
I actually got one of the leaflets here with me. There were thousands of them airdropped into central Beirut. Let me just show you what it is. It's written in Arabic. On this side, it says, after the success, and I'm quoting here, in Gaza, this is the new reality in Lebanon. And then on the other side, again, it's in Arabic. They have QR codes here and details of how to contact Israel and become an agent, basically, to work with Israel against Hezbollah. So the Lebanese army has been warning people not to scan those QR codes, saying that's a security risk.
And there has been some criticism of other Western media for not covering what Israel said in those leaflets, but also rebukes of U.S. coverage in general. This anti-war Republican, Marjorie Taylor Greene, speaking to CNN.
It's just wrong to tell Americans that every single Palestinian in Gaza was a member of Hamas. That's just not true. There were tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians murdered by these bombs that were dropped on them. And now the same thing is happening in Lebanon. And you see a lot of that war coverage on what you can find it in the international news, where it's more difficult to find in American news.
Independent journalists or content creators have tried to fill the apparent lack of Western media coverage. These images are from Courtney Bono, a photographer turned war correspondent who has crisscrossed Lebanon, outperforming major newsrooms by breadth and detail of her reporting. Her material is not published for any major news site, but exclusively on X, where she asks for donations from people who support her work. Bono has amassed over 100,000 followers. Take a listen.
I'm reporting to you now from occupied South Lebanon in the town of Kfar Kela. And for my Western followers, I really want you to take a look around, and I want you to imagine your own childhood memories, your own neighborhood, your schools, your hospitals, your libraries, your playgrounds, everything that you know and that you love wiped out in a matter of months. This is what ethnic cleansing looks like.
For more, we can cross to Beirut, speak to another independent journalist who's amassed a following of her own. Rania Khalek joining us. She's with Breakthrough News. Hello to you, Rania. Thank you for speaking to Scoop. Journalism at times of war so often relies on these sort of good versus evil tropes, and you have to really dig to find the nuance. What have you made of the international coverage of what's happening in Lebanon?
Well, as you mentioned, William, Lebanon's kind of gone under the radar because there's this bigger war on Iran that's overshadowing it. But all that said, I mean, look, there are a lot of foreign correspondents here in Lebanon who are doing what I think is really courageous on the ground reporting. However, it's really not translating into the mainstream Western press because the way you see the war covered there, it's always framing it the way Israel wants it framed, which is that Israel's attacking Hezbollah's strongholds, and that this is just a reaction to Hezbollah firing at Israel on March 2nd. And what's left out of that is that Israel has basically issued displacement orders for 14% of the country. As you mentioned, over 1 million people are displaced, and the Israelis are saying they can't return home to the south of Lebanon until Israelis feel safe. And on top of that, I just want to quickly mention that with the March 2nd Hezbollah firing at Israel, that was actually a retaliation of its own in response to 15 months of Israeli ceasefire violations, over 15,000 of them counted by the UN and the Lebanese government. Almost every single day, Israel has been bombing Lebanon, has killed over 370 people in that time, but that's also left out of the media coverage. And instead, you just get this very flattened depiction of, oh, Israel's attacking Lebanon for the safety of Israelis and is really just going after Hezbollah rather than all of Lebanon. I mean, I feel terrorized by this. I'm not even a part of Hezbollah's community.
Yeah, and if you look at those headlines, as you alluded to, Rania, and I'm sure France 24 has done it, I'm sure I've done it. But when you say things like Israel issues evacuation order before carrying out strikes on Hezbollah targets, that really simplifies the situation. And on the face of it, it can almost make Israel sound like it's being courteous. But the reality on the ground is very different when people have perhaps less than an hour to gather their lives together and flee.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's completely against international law. Just because you issue what Israel calls evacuation orders, but here in Lebanon we call them displacement orders. Just because you say this area is now in red and we're going to attack it, does not mean that civilians lose protected status. And you showed that footage of the RT correspondent nearly being killed by an Israeli strike when he was reporting from a bridge Israel had destroyed at the Litani in southern Lebanon. And Israel afterwards made a statement saying, well, he was in an area that we demanded people evacuate, so he loses his protected status. That's not how international law works. Journalists are to be protected, as are civilians, even if Israel says this area is no longer safe.
Yeah, and this all comes amid more and more concern that Israel perhaps has plans to turn Lebanon into something that resembles the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and people like to talk about something called the Dahia doctrine, which was Israel's military doctrine when they attacked Lebanon in 2006. And the idea is to use overwhelming and disproportionate force against civilian infrastructure to try to create a wedge between civilians and the authorities Israel's trying to weaken, in this case Hezbollah. I would say that doctrine has since expanded or evolved into the Gaza doctrine, which we've watched Israel carry out for the past 2.5 years in Gaza, where they overwhelming and disproportionately destroy everything that's needed to sustain human life. Every single residential building, we've seen them flatten hospitals, water, sanitation facilities, police stations, schools. Entire cities in Gaza are completely wiped off the map. And your correspondent in that opening there, she showed those flyers that Israel dropped last week on Beirut that invoked carrying out Gaza-level destruction across Lebanon. And that's not just psychological terror. Israel is, in fact, carrying that out in parts of South Lebanon as we speak. There have been intentional attacks on healthcare facilities. The Israelis say, without any evidence that Hezbollah is using ambulances, similar talking points that we heard in Gaza. So they've been attacking ambulances. They've killed over 40 healthcare workers. They've hit, I believe, 128 medical facilities. This is the Gaza doctrine being played out, against a huge swath of Lebanon. And it's really alarming because there's been nothing but impunity afforded to Israel. And so, there's no one that's standing in the way to stop them now. And this should be raising alarm bells. And instead, there's a lot of silence from the international press.
Yeah, and I just want to repeat what you said earlier, Rania. There is some excellent journalists in Lebanon, excellent foreign journalists, excellent reporting. The question is, why isn't there more? One of the advantages of having more press is that they could either confirm or deny allegations that Israel has sprayed herbicide over villages or use a banned substance, white phosphorus, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the reason journalists have not been allowed into Gaza, even until now. I think Israel does not want the international press corps to see exactly the crimes that were committed in Gaza. So, we barely scratched the surface with what we know has happened in Gaza in the last 2.5 years. And again, we see the Israelis saying over and over again that they're going to do it to southern Lebanon. We also, by the way, see the Israelis openly saying that they want to occupy southern Lebanon indefinitely and create a buffer zone that is depopulated of Lebanese, specifically Lebanese Shias. We see the Israelis saying that the Litani River is actually their natural border. And then, I go and I read the New York Times or the AP, and none of this is there. Like, why aren't you saying what the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, just said 3 days ago about Lebanese Shias literally cannot return to their homes in southern Lebanon until Israel decides they can?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk to us about Lebanese press. It's extremely partisan. And just curious how they're covering this war, and is it raising tensions between different communities?
The Lebanese press has always been divided along partisan lines, and there are, I would say, different flavors of, anti-Hezbollah media and then what we would call pro-resistance media. And the narrative you get really depends on what, who's funding that media outlet and which political parties that they're tied to. And I think that this also reflects where the country is domestically, because Lebanon is a very polarized country, very polarized about Hezbollah, especially whether, or not Hezbollah should have entered into this broader regional war, and whether or not Hezbollah should have arms. And all that's to say, you see certain media outlets that are very extreme and are saying, are backing sort of the idea that the Lebanese government should normalize with Israel, make peace with them, and disarm everybody south. They don't even really care if South Lebanon is given away to the Israelis. And then there's other media that sees this as, okay, Israel has invaded Lebanon. These people in the South are our people. They are Lebanese, and they have every right to defend themselves with arms, no matter what they call themselves, whether it's Hezbollah or something else. And this is not the time to be disarming this group when the country is under such extreme threat. And then, there are some outlets like MTV. I'll mention that it's a very, very extremely sectarian anti-Hezbollah outlet that actually earlier this week, people were very angry because they actually displayed a map of the southern suburbs of Beirut, noting which buildings are Hezbollah buildings. And then a few hours later, Israel bombed those buildings. So certainly you see all of this antagonism playing out in Lebanon. And I think it's a part of the sort of civil strife that the Israelis and Americans seem to want to stoke in this country.
Rania, real quickly, running out of time. You live in Beirut. It's getting more dangerous by the day, not to mention that you're a journalist. Have you thought about leaving?
I mean, look, William, I'm between Beirut and the mountains, depending on what I feel about my security on a given day. It's a very stressful situation. I don't want to leave. This is my home. But I do feel terrorized. Israel is bombing outside of the scope of what they usually bomb. They're bombing in what are considered safe spaces. So really nobody here feels safe, including me, and especially as a journalist.
Rania, thank you so much. Rania Khalek, joining us from Beirut from Breakthrough News. Thank you. That brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from Lebanese cartoonist Bernard Hage, published in L'Orient Le Jour, and it says, quote, "Come watch it here. The TV version has breaks." That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.